Right, preliminary design. This is the site. This is the view that you saw in the photo looking up through here. So the concept I had was to build the house over 3 levels up the hill, but work in a process that kept the cost under control, because we only had $550,000 to work. I want to say only, but it was over 3 levels. We knew it was going to be a tall house. We had box form, so we knew we had some slightly less or slightly more expensive construction techniques required. I suspected, well, with the geotech report, that this front end of the place, once it's in the fill, we were going to have some foundation issues, so we needed to have some money up our sleeve in that budget for foundation work. And so the concept I had was that we'd build a very solid, sturdy platform, especially out the front in the fill, and as we get back into the site, we can push the building back into the good ground in this middle level. So we've got a basement level, we've got a workshop, and I show a nice wall there, but one of the challenges we had is we decided we didn't want that wall there. And so we come in at the bottom level, garage, workshop. Come up through a central circulation space in the property, and kitchen over here. The primary views are out this way. They're not stunning views, but they're nice enough, and so that's where we wanted to focus the outward aspect of the house as well as the inward, because the driveway comes in from over here, comes in, wraps around and there, so you get a full view of this whole frontage of the house. So this particular attention to this was important. Played around with a number of concepts. This is one of the early ones, but it stayed pretty much true. And the concept was we had this rectangular box slicing right through the middle of this gable form here, which is this. So this is not too far off what we ended up with. And so we had this box form, which she loved a lot, and she gave me lots of pictures of just pure, modernist houses, and then she gave me lots of pictures of gables, and says I want both. And so this was my kind of solution, and we've ended up with a black box flying through the middle of a grey gable. And I wanted to give the illusion that the black box was literally just sitting through the middle of it rather than anything. So we've created cutouts in the deck here so that the cladding runs continuous all the way through on the box. We've given the engineer a bit of work by creating 1.4 metre cantilevers on the end, and I said I don't want to see any beams supporting it, I just want to flat feet, and you've got 160 mils to work with, so if you could please provide a cantilever of 1.4 metres, that would be much appreciated. On this bottom level here, I sort of had the idea that we'll be using stack bond block work, just because of the lack of availability of the nice coloured Stevenson's products, which I see Firth are starting to bring some products out now. We've gone for just plain grey stack bond, black grout. This originally was going to be one of our today's sponsors products, but unfortunately it's no longer. It's going to be WeatherTex, and the height of this was dictated by the length of a WeatherTex board, and WeatherTex being comparable price-wise to Shadowclad, we decided that was a good economical product to be using in this situation, considering we're keeping an eye on these costs and so forth. But the client then decided that he didn't want to be painting WeatherTex out on these corners, and especially since we're probably going to be painting it pretty close to black, which is obviously a no-no. He decided he didn't want to paint it, so we've gone for a vertical, not trim deck, but sort of like LT7, I don't know what you call your profiles, but your asymmetrical profile that's sort of fully symmetrical. So we've used that vertically. We've got cedar weatherboard. We've got quite narrow weatherboards. The client wants about 100 cover, no more, so to make sure we get that. Sustainability options. There were no real specific requirements from the client from a sustainability point of view. Just build us a house or design us a house. So the areas that we sort of focused on were just probably the 2 easiest areas were just the material selections as far as cladding was concerned. We investigated use of macrocarpa, locally milled and stuff, and we just had quality issues. So material selections ended up being sort of low-cost materials and the type of insulation and products we use, and sourcing as much of the product locally as we possibly could. And the other sustainability option was building orientation and just getting everything set up as best as possible for the sun, given the orientation of the site. Developed design. We modelled it up in the computer and got our black box flying through the middle of our gable form. I decided that the gable was horribly tall, and so we've introduced some slats, which also being a relatively west-facing sort of thing, would hopefully offset some of the frying factor of the master bedroom up the top. And this gable form was where the master bedroom was. She wanted sloping ceilings in the master bedroom. 2 entertainment areas out here, one out the back. There's our stack bond block here, cedar weatherboard and so forth, and our cantilever. All the contours are taken straight off the surveyor's plan, so we just banged it in the computer and it spat out the contours, which made it nice and easy for positioning things. This is not the same project, but this is one of the processes we often go through when we're doing that town planning assessment, is checking building envelopes. It's very easy to go through and take a couple of sections. Well, I wouldn't say very easy, but if you want to be totally accurate, you've got to do a lot of sections. So we've actually, this one straight off again, a surveyor's topographical plan, and we've got all the boundary heights and everything absolutely spot on, and we've created our building envelope, height and daylight recession planes in purple there, and so we can see the culprits. And so then you just ask the question, how well do you get on with your neighbour? And then we can make an assessment on whether a resource consent process is cost effective. You know, is the token gesture $1,000 for the council to rubber stamp your daylighting argument and your fancy daylighting 3D models worth it? Or is it because the client's going to contest it and not sign it off as a written approval? Do we look at somehow redesigning that? Let's watch this space on this project. During the design, we do the usual to and froing with the design process, and just basically refining that design, getting the client's input, keeping them honest about the cost all the time. I know you can sound like a bit of a nag, but clients have a wonderful habit of growing the size of their building by 40 to 50% from their initial intention. I don't know, is that the experience down here occasionally? That tends to have an impact on cost, in my experience. So I do tend to hammer it home. Whenever the client adds another room or grows the house by a metre or two across one wall that's 20 metres long, I do tend to point out the cost implications, and they say, oh, it's just a bit of roof and a bit of concrete and can't be that much. So as we're sort of refine that design to the point where the client's feeling pretty happy, I'm feeling pretty happy, we get our QS to put his estimate on the drawings. We usually provide him with a set of plans, 3Ds, and one basic cross-section and elevations, depending on which program we use for the 3D. And he comes up with an estimate. And he goes through and gives us an elemental estimate, and I was quite happy with his estimate because it came in at $450 plus GIST with everything. I thought it might be a smidgen light, but it gave us a bit of confidence because he's been sort of within 5-10% on about the last 5 or 6 projects, so it gave me a bit of confidence that we weren't too far off. We went through all the different costs. I checked up on him, made sure he was all on the money and felt pretty good about it. I thought he was possibly a little bit light on his kitchen. As it turned out, the kitchen price that we ended up getting was $22,000 for the size kitchen, so he wasn't too bad, and we added some bits in. And so what I do at this stage, if the client is satisfied with the estimate, because that's a key, I get them to sign off the design. And by doing that, I get them to sign the drawings as the design that they've chosen. I get to also sign the estimate as that this is an acceptable budget for the project. Without their signature, down the track, it doesn't give you much recourse to say that the client said it was okay. So I get their signature. I get my clients to sign lots of things, actually. And then I send off a fee letter. Because of my fees on a percentage of that estimate, I send off a letter stating that this is now the fixed fee, as per our agreement that you signed. So it's locked in. It's just advising them of the figure. It's not actually asking their permission. And that's usually a formality. It hasn't been a problem so far. And we move on to step 2, documentation. And I'll try not to bore you with it because I'm sure you've all got wonderful documentation processes in place already. So I'm just going to share with you how I go through it. Usually there's that sort of bridging process between design and documentation, which is our resource consent planning stuff. You know, sometimes the resource consent goes alongside the building consent, sometimes it goes before. It's a bit of that sort of thing. So that would be the first thing. We do most of that ourselves. If it's daylighting, cut and fill, excavation type stuff, we do it ourselves. If it's anything that I think I might not get first time, I sub-consult it out. This project coordination and integration of consultants is quite important. There's a reason we're out of engineering, and we've had a few hiccups with the engineering on this job. I suggested a particular, particular sort of design process that the engineer should go through. And engineers don't like being told by designers how they should do beams. I don't know. Through here, I suggested that all the unispan that we're going to put on this floor through here should span this way, so that we don't overload the lintel on the garage door with end loads of unispan going that way. The engineer told me that it was staffed, and that the floor slabs should go this way. We've just gone through the process of the engineer at his own cost redesigning and redrawing up the things so that his unispan now goes the way that I originally suggested. So it is pretty important that you get an engineer, first of all, that will listen and will take on board the whole process. And I find it's much easier to work for an engineer who actually gets quite excited about the project. They'll tend to be a lot more amenable to our 160mm thick beams hanging out 1.4 metres and come up with how can we come up with a solution rather than I don't like doing those. So we've managed to work through that. It's cost the engineer a little bit in redoing a few things because he mucked up. Yeah, through here we ended up the slabs going this way, which was good. So one of the things with coordination integration consultant services, especially with structural engineers, they tend to cost quite a lot. And so I like to get them to be engaged direct by the client, so I don't have to worry about paying the engineer and getting their money out of my client. It can be quite a drawn-out process doing it that way. So wherever possible, and this comes to talking with your client at the start of the project, is getting the client to understand the process, that the engineer will be involved in this project because of the nature of the site, the foundations, all that sort of stuff, and they'll be sending a fee proposal and all that sort of stuff that you'll need to sign so they can do the work. And that just gets me out of the money side of things. There's enough money issues with getting bills paid, all that sort of stuff, without having to worry about other consultants' fees as well. Building code requirements, probably don't need to discuss this too much, just assessment on that as far as our documentation. Going through, assessing what documents we need for this particular project, depending on the level of service and whether we're supervising it and how much information we're going to give versus building consent. My general conclusion that all jobs nowadays require epic amounts of documentation. So this job had 32 sheets of plans, A3. I guess a few notable mentions are that we do floor finishes plans, electrical plans, door and window schedules, as well as the usual plethora of details. This is a typical cross-section through the building. So here we've got the box flying through the gable. One of the conditions from the client with the gable was that they don't want to see any beams. So 8 metre ridge beam hanging down isn't a desirable element, so we ended up working with a series of portals, which we had to somehow absorb in that budget over the top so we could then put purlin type construction through, which was all fun and games, it was all good. Bit of retaining here, we've ended up using Sika bentonite as a product, mainly because the original product, Sika Proof SB, which some of you have probably used, we don't have a local applicator in New Plymouth. That's one of the downsides of being in a provincial town, is we don't necessarily have an applicator for everything, and it became cost prohibitive to have the nearest guy in Hamilton drive 3 hours to do 3 times to do the job. Apparently it's in 3 stages, so we came up with a product that only needed to be done once, and the bentonite seems to actually save us some money in the end. In this one I've specified everything right down to the type of fireplace and everything, so they've given me, the designer, a lot of control over a lot of the finish, which is great. One area of interest is we've got this box, and this is the edge of the black box, and what I didn't want to do is have the black box in the same plane as the inner part of the gable. I didn't want 2 flat planes, I wanted a distinct separation, and so that posed a few little issues such as load paths coming down and obviously weathering details. And I had a quick check before, and I can safely say now, oh here we go, and through here, so I wanted that distinct separation with that black box. I didn't want them in the same plane. It's one of those pedantic designer details that I wanted, and I'm sure the builder thinks it's crazy, but it's one of the ones I'll jump up and down for. And obviously having this actually go right over, not bury into the side of it, but the soffita that going right over top of it. And so what we did, and look at that, Rob. I had to check, otherwise I would have skipped through really quick and it hadn't been detailed there. So basically we've come up with a big colour steel max flashing, so we can keep the flashing line along the top of the parapet completely constant and not mix materials up. Using colour steel max because of our proximity to the surf. The other little area is we had a certain sill height that we wanted to achieve, but we also wanted full opening, I think sliders or bifold doors, which were then precluded the 1 metre barrier. But Alan, the owner, wanted somewhere to rest his elbow and drink his beer, so we've provided a reasonably unobtrusive solution to it without putting safety rails through the middle of the window at another 200 mils. So we actually turned it into a bit of a decorative feature that hopefully people will think, gee, that's a good idea. We also did the kitchen design on this one. So like I said before, they gave us pretty much a free rein on the whole process, which was really cool as far as detailed design. And we don't get to do kitchens that often. It's usually run around to the showrooms and get conned into $60,000 kitchens when a $30,000 one will do. This whole kitchen, we've used European beech veneer, we've used aluminium clashed edges, we've ended up with stainless steel on the back, Corian on the front, and then a bit more sort of Melteca Formica type butler's pantry. Lots of polished glass and stainless steel and continuous kick plates, but the joiner keeps saying, can we just take the end walls down? I said, no, we've got to take it all the way through. And yeah, that kitchen's come in for the joinery, including all the bench tops and everything, is 22 grand, which I think is a pretty stunning price actually, because it's not a small kitchen. So we've been pretty fortunate price-wise on this job. So that's just an example of our kitchen design. I've been very fortunate. One of my staff is an ex-joiner, and his prior life was programming CNC routers for the joinery company that he worked for. So he gets quite excited when we get a kitchen to do because it's right up his alley. So just cut him loose. Format of specification. I know there's a lot of different sort of opinions on specifications. I know some designers who don't use a traditional specification whatsoever. I do, because just habit of the way I was trained. I use master spec, and I know some people love it, some people hate it. I don't care, I use it. 3 formats, standard, basic, minor. I've chosen basic for this one. It has all the necessary stuff. And obviously, smaller jobs, I might be inclined to just go on the drawings only. They will tend to be jobs that I'm not project managing. When I say project managing, I use that word not very often there. Supervising, contract administering. And one of the reasons I use master spec is they have integration with their clauses with NZS 3910, which is the construction contract I use when I'm tendering and managing a project. So I like the fact that the two seem to dovetail together quite nicely. It means that there tends to be less holes for things to fall through as far as the administration of the entire contract from start to finish. The other thing I do, which I have a habit of modifying master spec slightly, and my pet hate is when you get down to the trade sections, they have a habit of putting all their project selections at the end of each trade section. If you put yourself in the building inspector, and I don't really want you to, but in the building inspector's mind or the builder, none of them read those specification sections. They get through about the first 5 pages, then they give up. So I have a habit of putting project selections as one section near the front of the specification to make it as easy as possible, because it's not our job to confuse, it's our job to clarify. And so I'm actually all for building inspectors offering me good advice. I'm more than happy to lock horns when they give me bad advice, like, can you put it on the drawings, because sometimes our building inspector forgets to take the specification on site. I don't consider that a valid reason for shifting documentation around. And I got quite a strong reaction from the council with that one. We talked about this earlier on about manufacturer's information. It's okay to assume that the builder has access to it. My personal opinion is just save the hassle and put it in the documentation and get it on site. We know what assumption is the mother of. And so, yeah, I get as much as I can into the specification, have one document where the builder can access. When you get stuck, oh gee, where's that A4 document of thick paper? Better go have a look in there. Huh? And so, yeah, things like the roof windows. Great that I've got a few sponsors in here, Ardex, and H1 calculations, all that sort of stuff. The gas fire details, even though the council don't need the gas fire details, the gas fitter does, so it's not always geared towards the council, even though they'd like to think so. H1 calculations, I use Design Navigator. Who here uses Design Navigator? It's pretty easy, pretty sweet, saves a lot of grief. It came out 2 weeks after I designed the spreadsheet to end all spreadsheets to solve energy efficiency, which I then shelved straight away because I thought, gee, this guy's onto it. So our reference building under the calculation method was 463 whatevers, and I did 424 whatevers, so it means mine's better. We achieved some pretty good R values in a few areas. These are the actual minimums, and the only one that probably glares out is this 0.15 for glazing. And the reason that's there, and that's what triggered off one of the calculation method, is we have some louver windows mixed in with the double glazing, so we've got a few areas that don't meet the schedule method. I tend to over-insulate. I don't strive for minimums, I strive for optimums. And I just, again, educate my clients as much as I can on that, you know, seriously, thicker bats in your ceiling is actually not that expensive. You only want to go up there once to do it, especially on a skillion roof. We do the usual checks. We do 2 checks in our documents. We do my check, which is the complete technical check, which is basically just a design integrity check, where I go through and make sure I'm happy with the way the house is, or the building's put together. It's not a comprehensive check of every word and spelling. That comes next. But it's basically me going through and making sure I'm happy with the way everything's going together. And I like to do it as a separate check because you can get bogged down in the spelling and start to overlook the details when you're going through and checking someone else's work. We also have a rule in my office that at the end of the day, the final check of your drawings is done by somebody other than the person that drew it. I don't know what your experience is, but when you're checking your own drawings, sometimes it's really easy to miss a mistake that's been there the whole time, but you've just been staring at it, never seen it, and it finally turns up on site. I like a fresh set of eyes wherever I can. Probably a bit hard in a sole charge practice, and those guys have probably got a much more disciplined approach. And then we do a full check against our working drawings checklist. I'm sure most of you got those. Ours was developed from our council's assessment checklist. We asked for the spreadsheet that they check their working drawings off, or their building consents off, and they sent it to us. And we thought, well, that's a nice, easy way to reduce the list of silly RFIs. And so we use that, and we've added to it with our own criteria as well. And so I don't know what other councils like, but our local one has been very helpful as far as supplying those sort of things. Construction, so this is the tendering pricing. Preparation of contract for tendering purposes. This is an area that I've done quite a bit with the McDonald's work over prior, and through the council work and stuff like that. I use 3910, only because I don't know anything else, so I just keep using it. Comes complete with all forms and schedules, which is handy, so I have modified them slightly as far as appearance and job applicability, but you know. Established insurance requirements when I'm getting these forms together, working out who's insuring the job, is it the client, is it the builder, depends whether it's new or reno. Calling of tenders, one of the things I just sort of occurred to me earlier on was we obviously have all our favourite builders and the builders that we don't recommend but suggest we've had success with in the past, is the terms I use these days. I never ever recommend a builder. Is when it comes to tendered projects, not all builders like tendered projects. Some will be enthusiastic but actually have absolutely no idea about the process. They're used to just getting a set of plans and then pricing it or putting an estimate in and away they go. So I do tend to encourage the use of contractors who are used to the tender process. If you're going to tender a job out, make sure you've got guys who know what the tender process is about, and I'll highlight that in a moment. So I tend to go, when I'm tendering out a project, to slightly larger firms. One-man bands don't tend to have the resources to put a guy on to price a job accurately and stuff like that. They'll tend to put some budget costs together. When the tenders come in, I do a tender analysis, and I have spreadsheets. I'm a bit of a spreadsheet junkie, numbers junkie. And so we end up with 4 tenders on this job. These 3 here in New Plymouth, well, Fletcher's in New Zealand, are relatively big boys. These guys have probably 15 builders. These guys probably have about 30, and Fletcher's about 30 in New Plymouth. And we've got a price there of $447, $451 and $475, all within CUI, and very close to our QS's estimate, I might add, which was fantastic news. However, this one here, with no breakdown whatsoever through the trades, he sent his tender in a week early because he was going on holiday, and he sent one in of $655. I nearly crapped myself because, you know, you go through all this work, you go through the process, the QS has done it, and your first price comes in at that, and of course you're thinking, well, the others must be close. He's a 2-man band, and it's the first job he's ever tendered. He's personal friends with the owners, and it just goes to show that the owner's friendly builder isn't necessarily the best choice for them. That's $200,000, 50% different. So needless to say, he hasn't got the job. We ended up with these 2 here in a bit of a nice little fun battle. I tend to go through and analyse all these and find out if there's any obvious discrepancies. It helps me highlight out if guys have missed stuff, make sure I can assess it. I also note out their tags, which are pretty minor on this one. Contract negotiation. This job was interesting because we had 2 very close lowest tenderers, and they were clear and clean. Their tenders were really good. And so, and the client says, well, it's $450, but it'd be nice to shave out 15 grand and make us feel a lot more comfortable. And Normally you have to go through a lengthy process of rejecting all tenders and then negotiating and stuff. And so the way I circumvented that, because it's just painful, is I requested alternative costings from the two lowest ones, and it was agreed that should they be successful, those costings would be treated as a variation after the contract was awarded. So when the contract was awarded, it was awarded on the original tender price, which is the correct legal step to go, and then we had some agreed savings that would then add into the job or take out of the job as a variation. And so we ended up getting it down to about $438 with the savings. I recommended a contractor to the client who ended up being about $3,000 or $4,000 clear, who wasn't the cheapest one to start with. And then we went through preparing the contract documents for signing by client and contractor, 3 sets fully signed, one for the owner, one for the builder and one for me, because we need to make sure that if we ever come to a dispute that we've got the correct documentation signed. Again, more signatures. Letters to the contractors saying you're successful or unsuccessful. Normally a phone call happens first and then I follow up with the official paperwork. They need to know whether they need to gear up or get ready. Building consent. Now, in this particular job, the Bennett House, we decided that because of the value of the project, it was a significant amount of money for these people, that $10,000 in building consent fees should wait until they've decided how much the project is actually going to cost through the tender process. So, although it might be prudent time-wise to get that building consent going in side by side with the tender process and save yourself 4 or 5, 6, 7 weeks of grief of dealing with the council, we decided it was prudent in this particular job to wait till we had a contractor on board, signed up, and then put it in for the building consent. And that's worked really good in this one. If budget is less of an issue and the job's going ahead regardless, maybe like council projects or commercial projects, we can get the consent in earlier. Our RFIs on this job, we had a total of 6, of which 5 we just sent straight back and said read the correct table in 3604 and so forth. Yeah, it was, we were quite astonished how well it went. And it was an engineering thing, it was nothing to do with us. Through the project, issue of variations and so forth, I have a spreadsheet system where everything is linked up because I just don't like duplicating stuff if at all possible, because I find that you never ever have enough money in your project management side of your fee, and so I'm always looking to streamline. So my variation order, this is one of the early ones. It's a price request, type C, and it's for using the Seeker bentonite as the revised quote and the removal of the HardieFlex protection, because with bentonite you don't need a protective sheet. And so that was our saving, which was one of the savings that we carried forward in the job. That there is then linked into a variation order summary, and so we've got a complete summary of all the variations at any time. These are always distributed to the client and the contractor every time they're issued, so the client is 100% up to date, and giving them that full summary rather than a pile of individual paper, they can see that their variations at the moment is a saving of $5,800 on the original tender price, and I've given them that there at the bottom. Through the project, the builder likes to get paid, so we issue, when they put in a claim, we issue a schedule for payment, provided that we agree with what they're claiming and is fair and reasonable. And that kind of looks like this, with a breakdown of retentions and all those fun things. And we have a second page to it, which shows, again, it's similar to the tender summary. And we also bring through that variation summary. So every time anything to do with money and costs goes through to the client, we're documenting it for them. We're making sure the client really gets a grip on the costs. Because, you know, at the end of the job, it's just, it's far too late. We need to be educating and getting our clients on board and understanding exactly what's happening and where the project is going. We do have one client who queries every single cent the builder ever claims, and did he really spend $149,000 on carpentry so far? Stuff like that. But you get those. Periodic site visits to observe the progress of the works, and I guess this is one of those areas where the liability and so forth comes into it. So I issue the site meeting minutes. I take minutes of each site visit, as tedious as it is, and I issue it to the builder, I issue it to the owner, and I issue it to other parties, say structural engineer or whoever happens to be involved in it, painter if need be. And I issue it within 24 hours while it's fresh. As soon as I get back to the office, email it around, fax it around. So I have, again, just basically a checklist of things to do with insurances, building consent, council inspections, actual progress, so if the client's not there, I can report on progress of their project. Especially if you've got a remote client, this area becomes particularly important if the client's not actually on site on a regular basis. And then various comments and discussions, usually over details or ideas or planning. And then, yeah, it tends to go over the page. But as thorough as you can and circulate it to everybody so that everybody knows what's going on and we have a paper trail, because paper trails are good. At the end of the job, practical completion inspection, which is what it means it's practically complete. It does not have to have absolutely everything, but obviously a small list of items to be completed, and we issue a certificate every time as per the requirements of 3910. So we don't tend to take shortcuts when it comes to the administration of a project, defects liability period. One of the interesting things I've come up with recently, it wasn't on this project, but a council project I did, and the builder told me on 5 occasions that the defect items were now complete. It was only on the 5th site visit that they actually were. There were 6 items on the list. He'd never actually visited the site himself to make sure the guys had done the work. Now, my fee didn't allow for 5 additional site visits at the end of the defects period. So in his final retentions, much to his disgust, and with the approval of the client, he found all my additional cost deducted off his final retention, which reduced his released retention to about 20% of what he's expecting, but fully within the bounds of 3910, and it pays to know the documents that you're dealing with. Final project phase, practice management. I'll just race through this a little bit because I know I'm dragging on. Quality management. We have a project checklist that goes in the front of each project file and has to be ticked off each stage, assessments of each stage, design, documentation and so forth. We have a working drawings checklist which we touched on. My computer folder structure, I'm pretty pedantic about making sure that each job is set up as neatly as possible, just as far as drawings need to be neat to be able to read. If somebody else has to go into the job folder, I set it up in a sequential process: pre-design, design, working drawing, specification, contract administration, and then all my checklists and so forth in the route directory of the project. And try and keep it as neat and simple as possible. You never know who the next contractor, like if you've got another draftsman come on board or something like that. Yeah. CAD management, I'll probably just skip that, but yeah, I try to keep everything as in a structured and up-to-date process as possible. Planning for projects, we carry out weekly planning sessions in my practice, usually Monday morning, coffee down at the local cafe. We set targets for the week, month and quarter, financial and number of clients and so forth. And we work on a pipeline philosophy, which is our next job comes out of a pipeline. So if you imagine a pipe, and these are all your inquiries coming in here, not all of them turn into jobs straight away, but my goal is to continually fill this pipeline so that at the other end, projects come out. And so as part of our targets is how many phone calls, how many inquiries, how many signed contracts and so forth. So we monitor that on a weekly basis, who signed what, where's it going, how's the pipeline looking. And if the pipeline's not looking good, what sort of action do we need to take? So I like to sort of be a bit more preemptive than reactive as far as the way the business runs. And at the end of that meeting, which usually takes about between half an hour and an hour, we have a weekly to-do list. And the idea of the to-do list is that I don't have to tell people what to do. There's a list for the whole office. It's got assigned dates and people to assign projects or tasks, and the whole office has access to that. If I'm not there and somebody has finished something, they can go to the list and see what's the next thing for them. Pretty simple, pretty dull, but it works. Financial management, not talking about accounting systems because that would be really boring. Time recording, we record everything on a spreadsheet still, and it's probably just because I do spreadsheets. I'm sure there are great programs out there, but one seemed to work for me. And the reason I do time recording, in addition to being able to bill out my time charge projects, is I back cost every single project, because I like to know whether I've made money on it or not, and whether that's a client I want to work for again. And so there's just a small sample. Now we could go through line by line, but we won't. Basically, we dashboard, and I'm sure some of you have come across it. A green light is great. That's made me lots of money. A yellow light is between break even and a 10% margin, and a red light's not so good. And I work out my break even from my previous 6 months financials and go back and work out what my break even costs per dollar and all that sort of stuff. And assess those jobs and keep an eye out for that person in the future. And ask myself why. Oh, first of all, why did we get a red light? What happened on the job? Was it over documentation? Was it a client asking way too much and us not identifying that the client was asking us to do a lot? It was very easy to get enthusiastic with a job and design. Scheme 10, we're still designing and we're on a fixed fee. You have to be a line in the sand, and so yeah, this particular period wasn't too bad. And the way we assess jobs is we always do a time charge analysis. So if the job was time charge, how did it stack up? And my goal is to, on a fixed fee or percentage, to do better than if it was on time charge. And that, if I can do it on time charge, I work out I'm on 20% margins if I'm on time charge, generally speaking. And that's it. Any questions? Oh, great.
My questions must have answered everything already.
I'll just talk too much.
Thanks very much, Tony. Always fantastic to hear about how somebody else does what we do every day. And I'm sure we're everybody pick one or two or three things out of that. So thanks very much for coming.
Cool.
Cheers.
Thank you.